Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's CPD webinar. This is on evolving stakeholder engagement for today's challenges. We're going to provide you with an introduction to the AA1000 Stakeholder Engagement Standard version 3, and we're also joined today by Hanya Gartner and Gaia Pretner. So I'm now going to pass over to Daniel, who's going to provide you with an introduction to Accountability's AA1000 Stakeholder Engagement Standard.
Great, thanks, Aimee. First of all, very nice to have everyone join us today, and our two working group chairs, Gaia and Hanya. We'll be talking with them a little bit later, but first I'll give an introduction. I know we have people joining us from our CSAP and assurance community, as well as others globally. So thank you all for joining us. We'll do a little bit of an introduction about who we are and what we do. Our standards work, and of course our focus today is our stakeholder engagement standard. Just in terms of introductions, my name is Daniel. I am a director in our advisory services side of the business at Accountability. I'm joined by not only Aimee, but a couple of other colleagues, Jamie in our London office and Udaya as well from our standards. So we'll be able to answer any questions that you have. Our hope is to give you an overview, an introduction with some content, but also answer any questions that you may have first about the standards work, the stakeholder engagement standard itself, and any questions about what we're presenting. And then we'll have our panel discussion, and we'll have another Q&A session at that point as well, so we can have targeted questions for our panelists. I do want to just reiterate that the session is being recorded, so we will be sharing the recording with everyone that attends or registers. Additionally, we have a Q&A function, so there's no chat function, I think, in this webinar, but if you can submit any questions you have through that Q&A function, our team will answer them and or share them for discussion at those Q&A moments. It looks like we have a good attendance so far, so I think we can go ahead and get started. So first and foremost, just an introduction to Accountability. All of you are here, so you'll have heard of us, hopefully. We are a consulting and standards firm. We work with businesses, investors, governments, and other organizations to innovate and advance the global sustainability and ESG agenda through improved practices, performance, and impact of organizations. Unlike others in the sustainability space, we're not an advocacy organization. We are objective advisors. And so in the same vein, our standards, as you'll see, are very practical in nature. We have three sides of our business: our advisory work, where we work with clients directly on sustainability projects; our standards business, who you'll be familiar with, and we'll talk a little bit more about our standards in a moment; and our insights or research work. So we do a lot of thought leadership work. You're welcome to join our mailing list, where we publish a good amount of thought leadership around standards, the standards landscape, as well as sustainability trends and practices. We serve our standards community and advisory clients globally out of our 4 offices in New York, London, Riyadh, and Dubai. So many of our attendees will be familiar with accountability standards. So as a refresher for them and for those who are less familiar, Accountability's AA1000 series of standards was initiated in the mid-1990s, over 30 years ago, and it currently consists of 4 primary guidance documents. We have our accountability principles, the AA1000 Assurance Standard, currently in its V3, the Stakeholder Engagement Standard, which we'll be discussing in more detail today, and our guidance on assuring GHG emissions. So that's a specific guidance document that's it's a supplement to our assurance standard. The assurance standard provides guidance for assurance of non-financial information. It's one of 2 leading, if not the only, assurance standards in the marketplace. And the stakeholder engagement, as we'll get into, that standard is the only one of its kind in the marketplace. We have other supplemental guidance, which provides guiding information around how these standards compare to others, such as our bridging document, But what differentiates the AA1000 series, I know that in the sustainability world, there is a proliferation of standards and frameworks. And what hopefully differentiates ours is that it's principles-based in nature rather than compliance-oriented. The 4 accountability principles, which are in that AA1000 accountability principles document, of inclusivity, materiality, responsiveness, and impact, serve as a bedrock or an anchor for the other standards and what we believe is a foundation for responsible business practice. So we'll take a look in a bit as to how that is being woven into our stakeholder engagement standard and the practices that we are promoting. So as we take a closer look at the AA1000 Stakeholder Engagement Standard itself, wanted to just give a snapshot of its history. Over 20 years ago, in 2005, Accountability launched the world's first stakeholder engagement manual. In 2015, which was most recently, we published the standard that has guided the field for the past decade. But as another decade has passed and the world has changed significantly, digital platforms, social media, and AI have fundamentally redefined the meaning of stakeholder engagement and how it works. Stakeholder voices are louder, their expectations are sharper, faster, and more consequential than ever before. And a new generation of disclosure frameworks, including the evolutions of GRI, the advent of CSRD and ESRS, the recently developed IFRS S1 and S2, and TCFD and TNFD, and the other associated regulations around them now require credible stakeholder engagement as a condition of compliance. And so it's increasingly important that this is defined in alignment and coordination with those other standards. So as time has passed, we have taken steps to update our standard to make sure it is current, modern, and relevant. Stakeholder engagement is no longer a discrete or ad hoc activity. It's strategic capability that is central to good corporate governance, risk management, and long-term value creation if it's done properly. This new era of stakeholder engagement demands a standard that is fit for purpose. So we'll now get into the standard itself and some of the updates that we've made to it to make sure that we're keeping up with the times. So building on the foundation of the work that's been done before and the most recent version 2 that was released in 2015, in the time since then, we have released our updated version of the accountability principles to include the 4th principle of impact. So the new standard preserves the existing accountability principles of inclusivity, materiality, and responsiveness that were the bedrock of the previous version, and puts the 4th principle of impact at the forefront of the standard and how stakeholder engagement is designed. So that's one major update. It also supports some other key changes. Regulatory compliance and interoperability. So alignment with the disclosure requirements of our new frameworks and standards for sustainability disclosure. As I mentioned before, GRI, ESRS, IFRS, S1 and S2, TNFD, and others. We're ensuring that we have alignment with those standards, interoperability, and as we'll talk about in a bit, we're also going the extra step of providing guidance to practitioners as to how that interoperability maps out. We're looking at digital guidance, new guidance on the use of digital platforms and AI to map stakeholders, manage engagement, and analyze insights at scale. This is a new development that was didn't look nearly the same when the previous version was released. So this is important that we've included this in how the standard is structured and giving the guidance. Ongoing engagement, a heightened emphasis on continual engagement to surface emerging risks and opportunities in real time. Rather than ad hoc or discrete engagements, we're looking at something that's much more live to inform decision-making more actively. And lastly, but certainly not least, perhaps most importantly, is this two-way dialogue focus, moving from consultation to co-creation. So an expanded focus on co-creation, enabling organizations to develop solutions with stakeholders rather than just for them. And we'll take a look at what this looks like. So with this version, this is sort of the embodiment of what all this comes together as. we're introducing what we're calling fourth generation stakeholder engagement. So in the past, we had all the way up to third generation, which was moving to more strategic decision making. But now the fourth generation is impact driven, it's integrated with corporate strategy, and it's built again for co-creation beyond consultation. So we're focused on a couple of key components of this. One is that engagement efforts are coordinated and consistent across an organization with a clear enterprise-wide engagement strategy that's aligned to corporate strategy. So no longer are folks that are engaging stakeholders doing so in isolation or differently. We have consistency across how this is done for different stakeholder groups, for different departments. It's still cohesive and coordinated. The stakeholder co-creation element, this is really important, and this is moving into a zone in which stakeholders are actually collaborating with the organization to shape strategy, shape programs, and generally shape the way forward, rather than them just being involved as a consultant or someone that's being informed. They're actually brought to the table in a much more active way. And so there's a lot of guidance as to how this can be done more effectively. And lastly, designing engagements that are impact driven. And this is something based on extensive feedback over the years. As companies have become more mature in their engagement, they're looking for ways to actually measure the ROI on the engagement investments. So the work, the effort that's been done, what are the results, what are the outcomes? So having measurable and meaningful outcomes, not just measuring the amount of engagement that's being done or how it's been done or what's been done, but what has come of it. What are the changes that have been made? How have stakeholder sentiments changed? What's more effective for the business? Again, a lot of this is meant to be grounded in achieving the objectives and priorities of the organization. So having measurements and indicators that are actually aligned to achieving those organizational objectives. And so then I want to get into a little bit of our process of developing the standard and what we're looking at in terms of next steps. But first, really importantly, at the core of the stakeholder engagement standards development is our working group. We formed a working group to provide expert review and revision of the standard based on practical perspectives and expertise. The group was designed to be global representation of major industries and standards users. So we have financial services represented, energy and utilities, industrials and consumer goods, sports and entertainment, audit and consulting firms, hospitality, academia, and sustainability industry organizations, among others. The working group consists of 25 members across 15 plus countries and many industries, as you've just heard. Working group provides a strategic direction for the AA1000SES v3, and their input is really shaping the output here. We also have subcommittees, which we'll talk about in a minute, focused on different elements of our stakeholder engagement release. Where we are in the process of the stakeholder engagement development and release, we're at our review stage now. So as with all of our standards, this revision is being developed through a broad, inclusive, multi-stakeholder process. So it's really living up to its own guidance. It's shaped by a diversity and depth of perspectives, as you've seen from the working group, but also through public consultation. Our standards team and working group have been hard at work developing the exposure draft, which has just yesterday been published for consultation. Consultation will close on June 15th, 2026. So it'll have a full 30-day period for review. You're welcome to scan the QR code there. We'll also be sending out a link to access the consultation draft. And this is all towards our goal of launching the standard in Q4 of 2026 at the latest. That means that it'll be released and published and publicly available with the expectation that it's formally replacing the previous version from 2015, the V2 in practice, as of 2027. So that's our timeline. We do invite everyone to participate in the public consultation process. Please share your feedback, your perspectives. All of the attendees on this call have different roles, responsibilities, experience, and different vantage points when it comes to what will be most effective in the standard providing the guidance that you all need. So this ensures that the standard is built to meet the needs of its users and fit for purpose. Now, I mentioned before that we have a few subcommittees in our working group. And the reason for that is that in addition to the release of the standard itself, we'll be publishing 4 supplemental guidance documents. As you can see here, these are the 4 documents. We'll talk about them in a moment, but this enables us to maintain the clarity and simplicity of the standard itself. As you'll have seen if you're familiar with our standards, we really try to make them very user-friendly, very understandable, and very easy to access. So open any page, you can understand what's going on. And so we want to maintain that and provide that with this version, while also providing more detailed guidance that practitioners are looking for when it comes to step-by-step implementation for different use cases. So we have 4 focus areas of our supplemental guidance. First is our practitioner's guide, and this is going to be providing more detailed instructions, examples, toolkits, and case studies to bring the standard into practical terms. And then we have a couple of specific focus areas. So our materiality assessment guidance is going to be enabling that linkage of good stakeholder engagement to materiality assessment processes. So giving practitioner advice for how stakeholder engagement can enable materiality assessment, whether you're doing a traditional or single materiality assessment, or applying what is increasingly expected through CSRD and the IFRS of double materiality, and looking at different versions of impact to the organization requires different levels of stakeholder engagement. So we want to really make clear that this standard can be very useful in that process, which is increasingly a requirement for different disclosure standards. Third is our assurance matrix, we're calling it, and that's providing guidance as to, especially for assurance providers, so many on this call, as to how you can adhere to the SES when it comes to the assurance requirements under our assurance standard. So linking the assurance standard to the stakeholder engagement standard, understanding how stakeholder engagement practices are considered credible and assurance ready. Lastly, and very importantly, we have our interoperability guidance, and that's going to consist of a mapping of the stakeholder engagement standard itself to other disclosure standards and frameworks. So as I mentioned before, a lot of these frameworks are underpinned by stakeholder engagement being a necessity. We're going to be outlining in this supplemental document exactly how the stakeholder engagement supports each of the most common, at the very least, standards and frameworks that are shaping the disclosure landscape. This should help with more streamlined reporting, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Each of the supplemental guidance documents is being developed by a subcommittee of the working group. The subcommittees are formed by working group members that have the appropriate expertise based on their role, skill set, industry, and interest. So it's certainly voluntary, but we have cohorts for each of these that are working on developing these supplemental documents, which will be released possibly not at the same time as our standard itself, but in rapid succession to provide additional guidance for application in 2027. And lastly, I just wanted to share a little bit about an important component of our stakeholder engagement standard ecosystem, which is going to be our CSEP certification. So to complement the release of the standard, Accountability will also be launching our Certified Stakeholder Engagement Practitioner Certification and Training Program. This will provide participants with full training on the standard itself, practical skills to apply it effectively at their organizations. It's designed for anyone who engages stakeholders, spanning sustainability teams, communications, HR, public affairs, investor relations, procurement, governance, and any other types of advisors. It is not just for a stakeholder engagement or sustainability team specifically. The standard is broadly applicable, and the certification is equally broad in its application. Participants will leave knowing how to design engagement strategies, facilitate credible dialogue, and apply the AA1000 Stakeholder Engagement Standard requirements in their day-to-day work. So making it very practical. The hope is that participants will leave being able to iterate and integrate stakeholder engagement insights within their corporate decision-making, not just running random ad hoc consultations. So giving them a much more connected, holistic, and strategic approach to conducting the engagements that they probably do as second nature, but doing it a little bit more thoughtfully, intentionally, and in connection with the rest of the organization. Just as we do with our Certified Sustainability Assurance Practitioner, or CSAP certifications, anyone who completes the training and becomes certified will be listed and recognized on Accountability's database on our website of certified practitioners. So you have that public recognition and the accreditation to go with it. So I'm going to take a pause now just to see if we have any questions on the standards, stakeholder engagement standard specifically, the CSEP, and anything else you'd like to know before we jump into our panel discussion, if there are any questions. So either we have a very clear presentation or limited engagement, but it looks like we have some good attendance. So I will just offer that if anyone does have any questions about the standard, about the development process, or about the CSEP training, or anything else about the firm and what we do, happy to answer any questions following the webinar. You're welcome to reach out to our team. I'll just put this up for another second in case anyone wants to scan our consultation QR code there. And then with that, I think that leaves us ample time for our panel. So what we're going to explore now in our panel discussion is a conversation with our two working group chairs. And we really want to focus this as case studies of their stakeholder engagement experience, some of what's driving their work, their perspectives on stakeholder engagement, how it's changing, and hopefully how their work on the working group and with the standard itself is going to help meet the needs of the market. So with that, I just want to introduce my colleagues here, our two working group chairs, Hanya Gartner and Dr. Gaia Pretner. As chairs of the working group, they lead on coordinating and managing the working group, as well as committees. They're both leads of the two subcommittees that we have. Hanya is leading our interoperability and committee, and Gaia is leading on our case studies examples committee, which is focused on the practitioner guide. Hanya Gardner is the director of ESG at Carrier, and Dr. Gaia Pretner is the head of sustainability at the European football clubs. So I'll maybe just turn it over to each of them to introduce themselves and their work right now on stakeholder engagement. So maybe we can start with Gaia and then move to Hanya. If you could just introduce a little bit about your background, your current role, and responsibilities as they relate to stakeholder engagement. I'll kill the screen share for the moment.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you very much for the presentation. Thank you for having me. As Daniel said, my name is Gaia Pretner. I am the head of sustainability European football clubs. I've always been a sustainability practitioner. I started working for major events, Expo Milano 2015. Then I worked many years in academic background and delivering postgraduate courses and research activities and consulting activities for different types of industries for Bocconi University in Italy. And then I ended up for a major project on environmental management in stadiums, European football stadiums. And since then I landed a job at the World Cup in Qatar 2022 as Sustainable Procurement Manager. And after 3 years in Qatar, I finally arrived at European Football Clubs, which is a membership association. I had to essentially start a sustainability function. I was the first. As a membership association, we represent all the clubs competing in the first division of the 55 UEFA countries. So we have around 830 members now, both men's and women's teams, and we represent their interests. So to align on whatever we do, we need to consult with them. So let's see that stakeholder engagement and consultation is at the core of what we all do in my company every single day. So that maybe make you understand why why I ended up in this committee. Yeah, so I had a PhD on sustainability management, and I did some engagement and sustainability strategy development in my past. So happy to contribute to the new standard.
Excellent, thank you. And Hanya, maybe just a brief introduction on your background and role at Carrier.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for having me today. So hi, everyone. My name is Hanya Gartner. I'm a director of ESG at Carrier. And for those that aren't familiar with Carrier, we're a global leader in climate and energy solutions when we provide heating, cooling and refrigeration for homes, buildings and the global cold chain. Our operations span over about 150 countries around the world, and we focus on delivering solutions that improve comfort, safety and sustainability at scale. In my role at Carrier, I'm responsible for overseeing our voluntary and mandatory sustainability disclosures and supporting the development of and oversight of our sustainability strategy. Stakeholder engagement has always been a key part of sustainability management, and I've seen that across many of my roles that I've had both in the United States and globally. And this has either been at the project level and as part of management system design, but also at the strategic level, as we obviously see in the materiality assessments that drive overarching strategy. Over the years, I've seen the importance placed on stakeholder engagement increase in conjunction with the maturation of sustainability. And as Daniel mentioned earlier, this aligns very much so with the rise in digital technology, social media, and that greater focus on transparency that we're seeing in the financial sector. And this is obviously exciting, but it's complicated. And to plan for that and to kind of help Carrier manage this complexity. This is why we've joined this engagement process and helping to help design and implement the stakeholder engagement standard in alignment with the interoperability. So really excited to be here, really excited to discuss this further with Gaia and Daniel and the rest of you.
Excellent. And I want to get a sense of, and maybe I'll combine two questions here, but we're in a time, as you both mentioned, where stakeholder engagement is changing. You both have a unique sort of role and different types of stakeholders, different types of organizations that you represent. It would be good to hear from your perspective as someone who's running that kind of work. What are the most significant challenges or risks that you're seeing when it comes to stakeholder engagement that we're confronted with today? How have these changed over time? And as you not only joined, but you're chairing the working group, both of you. So what's driving that and that decision? What role do you want to play in sort of addressing some of those challenges and risks? And maybe we can start with Hanya this time.
Sure. So voluntary sustainability disclosures has been around since the 1990s. It sounds like the stakeholder engagement standard has been around since then as well. It's been really interesting to see in the sustainability space maturing so rapidly, I think, in the last few years, despite the political nature of sustainability, particularly here in the US. And so we're seeing this maturation of the disclosure frameworks, but then also a consolidation, which is extremely helpful for us sustainability practitioners. We're also seeing sustainability move from that marketing landscape towards more finance, legal, and risk. And speaking specifically from the perspective of large businesses, either public or private, despite this politicization of sustainability, we're noticing an increase in global regulations, investor demand, and customer demands. Notably on the regulation front, the EU CSRD plays a more prominent focus on stakeholder engagement, and perhaps more so than we're used to, in particular here in the US. And because it's mandatory in nature, we have to pay closer attention. And so the stakeholder engagement standard is extremely helpful for organizations like Carrier in understanding what global best practices look like, sharing that information with key decision makers, and working across our departments in showing them what that best practice looks like and how they can improve their processes. And so it's because of this reason that I joined the working group. And it's really to represent those voices of companies that are looking for additional guidance on how to improve existing processes to help make their case for change, not only across the organization, but particularly with leadership as well.
Great. And Gaia, how about from your perspective? What are you seeing in terms of how things have changed and what you're focused on?
Well, I said that stakeholder engagement is part of what we do as an organization, but on the other side, my job is also to support our members to deal with sustainability and to do their own stakeholder engagement as well. And the majority of the companies, the European football clubs that we represent, are at the end of the day small and medium enterprises. I mean, the big names that you can have in mind are around maximum 1,000 employees, and the majority of the European clubs are around 50, 100, maybe maximum 200 employees. So the major difficulty that I found, and I think it's applicable to many realities, especially in Europe, I also come from Italy, it is the reign of small and medium enterprises, is that many times these companies would benefit a lot from a proper stakeholder engagement process, just for sustainability, but in general also to address new changes that are happening out there. You mentioned the digital changes that have occurred in the sport industry. This is a big topic. Fans are now way much more closer to the coaches, to the players, to the athletes via social media. So addressing different types of expression, also of opinions from our stakeholder, is a big challenge. So to me, the difficulty is to have someone inside the company that can have enough time, enough competence, and enough understanding to do a proper process that can be useful and not just, a tick in the box exercise that can fit well the need of the organization. Not just again on sustainability, but a little bit in general, more in my view, for the business strategy, and that's why I kind of designed a little bit my role in the committee, saying let's try to make the standard easy and applicable also to someone that is not a sustainability person that has been done this job for 20 years or something like that, but is new and has to find a way to make it work in a small and different environment. So I would say this, so make it applicable also to smaller companies that don't have to do it by law also.
Right. So we have two contrasting sort of situations. One where there's a lot of requirements as to what to comply with, expectations of a large company, delivering on a mandate for disclosure, and as you mentioned, Gaia, in contrast, the legal requirements there, versus those that are private, small, have very unusual stakeholder landscapes that also need a very practical guide. And so hopefully the standard can enable both of those needs. I guess the next question is, each of you are chairing a subcommittee, so would love to hear how you and the working group and subcommittees are working on the updated standard and the supplemental guidance documents to specifically address these challenges. What are you prioritizing? How are you applying that kind of thinking as to, how do we solve the problems that we're each seeing in our stakeholder engagement? Maybe actually with Gaia and the subcommittee that you're working on.
Yeah, so the subcommittee I'm working on is exactly working on the practitioner guide. So essentially is providing some concrete examples from different industries of how the different steps, let's say, of the stakeholder engagement process could look like in practice. Again, this comes from the daily work that I do with my members. That is, okay, we can give them a little bit of theory, but then they appreciate some just concrete examples from other players in the industry. I must say that at the beginning, we thought about integrating specific example in the main text of the standard, but then we realized that this was not going to work, and then it would make sense to have a separate practitioner guidance, of course, with direct link between the main document and the second one, that for each single step provides some concrete example, maybe sometimes even some toolkit, some templates, for instance. How do you draft a report on the, I don't know, on a workshop you do to consult your stakeholders? So really provide also some template, if you like, that the user can utilize, let's say, to streamline its work. And of course, in the committee, we have representative very different industries and also very different geographies and also some academics. So the perspective is quite wide and varied. And the amount of examples that we collected already is quite impressive. The problem probably is like where to start and where to finish when it's too much. But I think this could be a useful addition to the standard for who is a little bit new to this process.
Excellent. So addressing that challenge of whether it's small organizations that don't have many resources to allocate to this, or folks that are just new to this practice, providing that practitioner guide to really give step-by-step guidance and templates, case studies, really useful tools for anyone to be able to do this fairly easily, hopefully. Obviously, it's still, it takes work, but at least there's clarity as to how to pursue it. Hanya, would love to hear from you as to the work you're doing on your subcommittee and more generally how you're looking at the standard and addressing some of the challenges you all at Carrier are having.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at this from a different perspective, based on the pressure that I think a lot of large multinationals or cross global organizations. So I work on the interoperability working group right now, which, like Gaia said, is comprised of many different professionals from different groups and organizations. What we've been really focusing on at the moment is prioritizing which of the frameworks across the world and based on the different organizations that we're working with and the pressures that they're feeling, which of those should we prioritize alignment to? And then ensuring that there is consistency and consolidation of statements that are being made. We don't want contradictions with what this standard is saying versus any other standard, which is not the case, because what this standard does is expand on the reporting requirements. But what we're trying to really do is essentially make the job of sustainability practitioners easier. We're inundated with the sheer amount of reporting frameworks, regulations, raters and rankers, etc. And so the goal of the interoperability working group is really to cut through the noise and make it very easy for sustainability practitioners around the world to understand by following the sustainability by following the stakeholder engagement standard, you're meeting the obligations naturally and providing more color and flavor and context. We'll also be producing a map so that practitioners can see where the stakeholder engagement standard will align with the various reporting frameworks that they're using. And kind of demonstrating that the stakeholder engagement standard will support disclosures. And I think that's a gap that has been missing in the space. And as stakeholder engagement is being incorporated more into these regulatory requirements, we're providing a guideline that supports practitioners in their disclosure requirements, which is quite exciting.
Excellent. I'm curious, Hanya, and this is a little off script, but I'm just curious. You've mentioned a lot of the work that's required for disclosure and alignment, and hence the interoperability. So it's a very sort of technical application of the standard to the reporting landscape. I'm curious from more of a practical sort of sustainability standpoint for an organization like Carrier, or if there are other big corporates that might be on the call, how you're looking at stakeholder engagement as something that's generating value or aiding in your sustainability ambitions, and how is stakeholder engagement like playing a role in that? Maybe you could just elaborate a little bit more from the more practical standpoint of beyond the compliance.
Absolutely. That's a great question. So you mentioned earlier about co-creation and how important that is. The way Carrier looks at it, I'm just going to speak from Carrier's perspective right now. And I'm sure many organizations follow this, but for one example of that being, we work very closely with our customers. We're not pushing out products that we think the world needs. We actually need to listen to the voice of the customer and understanding what is it they're looking for? What are their sustainability pain points? What do they care about when it comes to human rights? Where are their priorities when it comes to sustainability? And so taking that information from them, first by desktop research, but then having that desktop research really drive that engagement with them. It's what do you mean? What is it that you want from Carrier? What would drive you to go to a competitor versus us? So we're trying to get ahead of potential issues down the line by understanding really the mind of the customer, so that we're developing and designing and creating and putting out there those products that they're looking for. So that's one example. Another example is engaging very closely with our investors, understanding why it is they're looking at various sustainability topics, and ensuring that our programs are meeting their needs in addition to our customers, our communities, our own employees, our contractors. The same approach applies in this co-creation of benefits, not just for Carrier financially, not just for the people that work within Carrier, but for the world we share, is essentially how Carrier calls it.
Excellent. And I guess same question to Gaia. I mean so far you've been talking a lot about the stakeholder engagement itself, and I do want to get a little bit more into the impact of that. But before we do, just similar question, because you're not lead of stakeholder engagement, you're lead of sustainability, head of sustainability for EFC. So I'm curious from a standpoint how you see the stakeholder engagement standard and that work impacting your sustainability initiatives and objectives, and how does it enable that?
Well, when I joined the organization, I had to create a strategy, and so I started with a typical stakeholder engagement. So I did it on 3 levels, essentially. The first one was, first of all, I asked my colleagues. I used it also as a way to explain to them who I was and what I was supposed to do, because when I arrived, it was a little bit this standard classification of sustainability is just environmental topics. And I used this opportunity of internal stakeholder engagement to explain a little bit that, it's not that you hire a sustainability manager and then you're done with sustainability. Everybody needs to work a little bit differently, you know? So that was the first step. And then the second step was a set of interviews with key stakeholders in our sector. So UEFA, FIFA, federations, leagues, NGOs, clubs, think tank, and finally a survey with our members. That was, I would say, the most pretty straightforward. And the question were essentially trying to orient what I was going to do. So across the different topics that are relevant in sustainability in football, in which area you feel you are more advanced, in which area you feel you need more help, in which area you think is more important. And this help us understanding where the industry stand for. So for instance, that on social areas, they were more advanced than on environment, for instance. Mm-hmm. And in environment, there was a huge interest for energy efficiency. When I arrived, it was just the beginning of the Ukraine-Russia war, so energy prices has gone quite up. And many clubs are looking into building new stadiums, so infrastructure is also quite important. So that gave us a little bit of hint where we had to focus more and support our members. providing the relative contents. But it's a daily process we do.
Right.
So
great. Well, our last question that we have here is about impact. And one of the major updates that's central to this version of the standard is the inclusion of the fourth accountability principle, which is impact, which was most recently included in the assurance standard V3 after being introduced in the accountability principles in 2018. And this is a defining element of what we're calling fourth generation engagement. Being able to measure and improve the impact and value of engagement activities for both the organization and its stakeholders. And so I'm curious, as we think about impact, what you believe will be the most significant impact and benefit to the stakeholders with the release of this new version. So not just from the engagement itself, but how will this enable users, what capabilities, whether that's skills, systems, leadership buy-in, do you think will be most critical for them to achieve the benefits that the stakeholder engagement standard can offer? So maybe with that, we can start with Gaia.
okay. The last is the easiest, right? Well, I think the new approach fits well in the new world, essentially. So a new way of co-creating products and services, Hanya was saying, needs also a new way of evaluating what you're doing and how your stakeholder evaluate it. And in my sector, I can tell you it's changing. I mean, the new generation consume football in a different way. A young kid won't spend 90 minutes in front of the screen watching the match. They just look the highlights. So it's changing a lot the way our product, let's say, is delivered out there into the world, and also the type of positive and negative impact that we can have. Of course, football and sports in general have a huge power of influence on large audiences. No, a message delivered by a famous players can impact millions of people. So that's the new dynamics when we believe that our strategy is to take into account all, so if you like, the intangibles impact that we can have. How to measure it properly, that's a very good question. Maybe something that this standard can help us understand a little bit more. Yeah, the being able to listen a little bit more of the new way of interaction and impacts we are generating is part of the problem, I would say, and of the solution, hopefully.
Excellent. And Hanya, what do you think will be like the most significant impact and benefit to stakeholders with the new version, and what capabilities are necessary to build within an individual or organization to achieve those from your standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, we're heading into a really interesting time right now with the growth of AI and how that's disrupting, I think, business around the world. And just from my experience of working in very technical, heavy infrastructure firms, there is this focus on data-driven decision-making, etc. And it's very hard to kind of discuss these things with finance or with engineers about the benefit of the more softer human side of stakeholder engagement, for example, and not contributing to time, contributing to cost. And so as people are starting to make more decisions with AI, we're kind of facing headwinds, right? Financial materiality is very easy to determine what the impact is. It's not that easy to showcase the positive outcome of stakeholder engagement. The key example that I provided before about customer engagement obviously shows kind of that value driver. But with this kind of next generation of stakeholder engagement, instead of being a tick the box exercise that says, yes, we did that, therefore file it away and we're okay, really demonstrating the ability with our own leadership, with our investors, with all of our stakeholders, that the point of this stakeholder engagement, the point of the investment of your time is so that we can get that mutual benefit for our products, for our communities, for our employees as well. So I think it's coming at a really great time where there's a lot of disruption in the world, geopolitics, AI, technology disruption. And so really focusing on that very human element of how we can create value collectively with that need for human interaction is really important. And it's great that I can use something like this for our leadership and key decision makers across the organization.
Excellent. A little optimism in this world where the human input is still valued and critical to put at the forefront while we continue to adopt new ways of working with AI. I do want to leave just a little bit of time for any questions that may have come from our audience. So Jamie, I don't know if you've been hopefully monitoring our Q&A there, if there's any questions.
Yes, thank you so much everyone for your participation and for joining us today. I have ordered some of our questions today, and I think because we have a little bit of extra time, also just selfishly added in a couple questions that I'm curious about, so we might get to those if we don't receive any new questions in the question box. We're going to start with one that Gaia, actually you hinted at in one of your answers today, but I would love to know a little bit more about how an organization can really motivate people within the organization to pursue stakeholder engagement. Is it often from a regulatory standpoint, showing that there's pressure from external stakeholders, internal stakeholders? What are the pressures that companies tend to face the most in this respect today?
Goes. I think Hanya spoke a lot about the regulatory part. So if you have to do it, you have to do it. If you are CSRD, I mean, it's clear you have to do it. So that's an easy answer. It's more challenging when there's no mandatory obligation. Here, my perspective is that it helps you make more informed decisions, essentially. So it's like acquiring information, and in a world that is changing so quickly, I think it's important doing it. What you should do now, explaining that if you want it to work, you should really identify what are the right stakeholders to engage, and not speaking always to the same people and say, oh, we did the stakeholder engagement, I call 5 of my good friends and I already know more or less what they were going to say. That's not how we do a stakeholder engagement. I think, yeah, I will try a little bit to push in terms of it helps you make more informed decision. As a matter of fact, not just on sustainability, but also in terms of business case and business strategy.
Definitely speaks to what Hanya just spoke about as well, in the sort of headwinds of what the sustainability world is facing now today. That actually is a great sort of transition into the next question around how organizations can actually implement stakeholder engagement and what's a pretty complex reporting landscape. Hanya, if you could just speak to that really briefly, and then we can move into the remainder of the questions. Thank you.
I mean, our priority, we have a small team, and I think a lot of sustainability departments in the US, I can't speak for the rest of the world, have quite small sustainability teams. We're very much, what do we need to do right now? And so we're very much going through, say, the CSRD, for example, line by line, what is being asked of us and where are our gaps? And in some respects, some of these gaps are in the stakeholder engagement space. And so a couple of years ago when I was going through the CSRD, I was like, well, how do we do this? What does that look like? What is best practice? And fortunately, having now worked with accountability, there is that kind of, this is how you do it. We'll handhold you through the process sort of thing, which doesn't just help me understand the context, but it helps me communicate with the rest of the organization. This is what is expected of us. This is the benefit of doing this. And this is the potential output, the value that we can create, the risk mitigation that we can achieve, to get everyone on board. Because if I'm speaking to what I think is possible, no one's going to listen to me. But if there is a standard, if there's something based on best practice, I can say, look, this is best practice. This is based on international input. Then there's some legitimacy behind the recommendations that I'm stating. So there's a lot of benefits in this standard and the ability to meet these increasing regulations around the world. So I'm really thankful that accountability is developing and pushing out this standard for us.
Thank you, Hanya. I think we're very excited about the interoperability work, so thank you for that. One more question for Hanya or Gaia. Maybe I'll direct it first to Hanya to sort of switch the order this time around, and then Gaia, if you have anything to weigh in, please do add. How do your businesses engage with any sort of local or indigenous communities or groups that might be part of your value chain or a potential customer group? And does the standard help with that type of engagement?
Yeah, that's a really timely question. We're currently going through the human rights risk screening across our operations. So for now, we haven't identified any Indigenous groups near our manufacturing facilities or anything of that nature. When it comes to engagement with our communities, that's done at the operational level. We haven't yet institutionalized what that looks like. Carrier is we're a 100-year-old startup is what we call ourselves. So we're building essentially from the ground up, which is why best practice frameworks really help us in the establishment of these programs. So it's currently done at the operational level, which is why this standard helps us bring this up to the strategic level and create that framework that can be applied simultaneously, consistently across the organization. So to speak to that, it's not currently happening in a strategic level. It is happening in the operational level through our EHS management system and ISO kind of requirements of Plan, Do, Check, Act. But to elevate this to the strategic level, the standard helps us make the case for that and then also implement that in a way that's consistent. Hopefully that answers that question.
It does, thank you. I'm going to sneak in a new one for Gaia, if that's okay in that case. So you mentioned briefly that football has now changed with these digital advancements and fans are closer to teams than ever, while also facing that different changing standards. Now, with ever-growing hardened sustainability regulations for European clubs, how do clubs manage these continuously increasing pressures without falling behind or facing penalties? Do teams have the capabilities and capacity to address sustainability, stakeholder engagement, critical response, or are they having to upskill, hire consultants, or find other solutions?
Well, that's my daily job. Of course, there are different levels of maturity, capacity, and also pressure, because we deal with both EU countries and non-EU countries. I would say that in terms of reporting, the large majority of the football clubs are not in scope anymore, with maybe some exception of those clubs that are part of big groups. But then, let's say, the burden comes at the group level, not necessarily at the club level. It's a little bit tricky, but it's part of the job we're trying to do also jointly with UEFA. Now, most of the obligations come from UEFA, especially if a club wants to compete at the UEFA club competition. They need to have a strategy. They need to fulfill certain obligations in terms of policy requirements on child protection, accessibility, anti-racism, and equality, diversity, inclusion, and environmental protection, which are identified as the main issues in the football environment. And we try to provide guidance with webinar, with best practices. Again, the best practices collection. We try to be very, very practical because people that work in clubs also most of the times are people that are working in the stadium during match days, that do operations, so they don't sit most of the day in front of a laptop. They are out there doing their job. I see many people transitioning from other roles. In football, it's quite typical to have people coming from marketing or communication that are put into sustainability. In other cases, if there's a foundation, sometimes it's the person running the foundation that takes over. CSRD had a good, there was a moment where it seems many clouds were going under the scope of CSRD that attracted the attention of CFOs because of the double materiality requirement. We did a joint webinar with my colleague from Strategic Finance, and we had majority of the attendees were CFOs. So I would say that when regulation is involved, automatically the clubs pull in relevant function like legal and finance. When it's more funds or licensing pressure, they manage more via a dedicated team if they can afford to have it, or via people working in other function that has to learn and that follow a little bit our services, I would say, to try to cope with the need. But yeah, there's a little bit the need of more understanding of these concepts and in the landscape, I would say.
Excellent, thank you. It sounds like the EFC is definitely very focused on sort of that cross-role functionality, being able to really upskill, and it sounds like a great hub for the participating teams. So thank you for that. I know we are at time, so if there are folks who can stay on a little bit longer, I believe we have 3 more questions, and anything that we don't get to in the chat box today, we will respond to over email, and I can provide an email address shortly. So one question briefly on how performance and impact will be differentiated in the standards. Daniel, would you be able to answer that one?
Sure. And if you'll take a look at the AA1000 accountability principles, which are articulated on our website as well as in the principles document itself, you'll see there is a formal definition of our principle of impact. And so when it comes to anything, but I'll apply it to the standard itself, impact we're really seeing is what is the change, the outcome, right? Which is essentially the change that results from the action that's been taken or the decision that's been made. We usually think of a process measurements in a couple of different components. There are the inputs, right? How much effort or resources are put into something. The outputs or performance, as you've called it, which is the measurement of what's actually happening on the ground in that activity. And then the outcomes, which is what we would call impact. So the change that results from that process. So that's sort of a simple definition. When it comes to stakeholder engagement itself, again, you'll see in the standard when it comes out, the first phase is to define an enterprise-wide engagement strategy, which should serve as an anchor for all engagements that are conducted. As part of that strategy, the guidance is to define indicators or KPIs at that level, which are impact-oriented. So you may be measuring if it's related to the stakeholder ecosystem itself, the change in sentiments of your stakeholders, the change in relationships that result from the engagements, or it might be indicators that are much more closely tied to the corporate strategy, and really measurements of how effectively the engagements are contributing to the achievement of your corporate objectives. So those will be more classic business KPIs that you might be able to actually tag or link to the engagement work. So that's a short answer, but happy to elaborate on that further.
Thank you, Daniel. If we don't get to anything today, again, we just dropped the email address in the chat box. We have 2 remaining questions about the CSEP, so I'm going to combine them into one. Daniel, if you could tell us a little bit about how long the stakeholder training certification, the CSEP program, takes, and about any insights you can offer into the cost of the program.
Yes, and some of this will be information that we'll be sharing over the next couple of weeks. We're in the process of actually building out the CSEP content. We are looking at what will probably be a 3-module training program. We're going to have 2 different methods for delivery, 2 different models likely. One will be for a specific organization, may have a team that they'd like to undergo the training. So that will be sort of a highly customized training that will be offered for a group of 10 to 15 staff members or employees. It can be a stakeholder engagement team. It can be a cross-departmental team. And that will be a training that's offered on an individualized basis. The content, the activities, the exam, all of that would be customized to the organization, its industry, its peers, its own strategy and processes. So weaving that into the training itself. So that's something that can be done for an organization. And otherwise, what we'll probably be doing is having quarterly sort of public sign up, if you will, publicly held trainings that folks can sign up for that will have a lower cost. It'll be a little bit shorter, virtual and lighter touch. So in terms of duration, it'll be shorter because it won't have as much customization. We still want the training to be interactive. There still will be that qualification exam, and the fundamentals of the qualification will still be a part of that, but it'll be sort of industry and company agnostic, right? So they'll probably be capped at probably 2 participants per company per session. So you can space that out if you have more people, or you can bring in accountability to do a team training. So more information on that will follow. We'll be sending that to everyone on this list and others, as well as the cost information for those 2 models.
Wonderful, thank you. That concludes the Q&A session.
Excellent.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. So we just want to say thank you to everyone for joining today. And from Accountability, we want to say a massive thank you to Hanya and Gaia for joining and for providing such wonderful insights and a great panel discussion. As a reminder to any of our CSAPs that are in attendance, you can claim CPD credit from this webinar, and we will be sending a follow-up shortly. We'd also like to share that we have some more opportunities to come where you can earn CPD credit. So next month we will be hosting another panel discussion that focuses on stakeholder engagement in the UK utilities industry. And then in July, we will be joined by Mark from Tractivity to explore strong data governance and stakeholder engagement software. And if anybody has any additional questions or concerns, as Jamie mentioned, please reach out to standards@accountability.org. Thank you very much, and we hope you all enjoyed this session.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you to our co-chairs and panelists, and to everyone for joining us.
Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thank you.